Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman. This is another edition of Westdoc Online. I got my headphones on today because this movie is all about sound, really all about sound. And it's called 32 Sounds, and we're going to get to it and the director in just a minute. But I want to remind you, we're brought to you in part by Real Screen Summit coming up in January in New Orleans. This is for filmmakers, buyers, sellers, superstars, wannabes, cameraman, sound man, editors, predators, everybody. Go to our website at the westdoconline.com and scroll down to the bottom. There's a link there. Give you all the information. And we're also on Riverside platform, which helps us give you a better picture and better audio. And if you click on the link there, you can get a 15% discount. So today we have filmmaker, director Sam Green. Let's say hi right away to Sam. How are you?
I'm good, Chuck. Thank you for having me on the show. And I'm feeling a little upstaged from your headphones. You know, you look great and are taking sound seriously. And
well, I'm actually surprised that you don't have like big cans on, as they say, right? And I don't usually wear these. I have these little teeny. You know what? I wonder if I should just switch to my little. No, this is fine.
You look great. You look like you're.
You have made quite an unusual film here. And you have a collection of unusual films that we're going to talk to in a second. But 32 Sounds is kind of an immersive celebration of sound and our perception of the world. And I think it's important to preface this conversation by saying, in my opinion, and many filmmakers' opinions, you can get away with fuzzy, shaky camera and, you know, it's not so great. You cannot get away with bad sound. You have to have good sound in a film. And I guess 32 Sounds refers to the different chapters in the movie, and each one is kind of like a different section of sound. And I'm really glad that our conversation actually was pushed back a couple of days, so it gave me a chance to watch the film for the second time yesterday. And it's amazing because you see things that you don't see the first time, and you hear things that you didn't hear the first time. But what got you into making a film about sound?
Well, almost all of the films I've made have come out of the previous film that, you know, and in this case, I made a film about the Kronos Quartet, the great classical musical group. And it made me really think a lot about sound and how people listen in the context of cinema. Because if you really listen to the Kronos Quartet, their music is stunning and amazing and marvelous.
Music is a place.
Music is all about imagination.
You have to play being yourself.
One of the things about the Kronos that I like is that they get inside the music.
The sound of two violins, a viola, and a cello is an amazing sound.
And so with that film, I tried really hard to figure out ways to get people to really listen, because there's a big difference, as I'm sure you know, Chuck, between sort of very passively letting stuff come into your ears and having your ears be open and kind of leaning into the sound and active listening. So that really planted the seed. And then I came across Annea Lockwood, the main character in the film, just sort of randomly. And that she was a great muse, and I kind of built the film around her in a lot of ways.
There's a sequence, I think, 3/4 of the way in the film, where she's out in the woods. I'm assuming near her home in upstate New York somewhere, and she's got some kind of an immersive microphone that's going into the water.
Yeah.
And what was she hearing? Or what did you hear when you put a mic, a special waterproof mic, obviously, in the water?
So Annea Lockwood is a musician, composer, sound artist. She's made work for about 60 years. She's originally from New Zealand. And she's sort of one of those artists who transcends labels. So a lot of times what she does is kind of sound art, the border between sound art and music. And I filmed her at a marsh on the Hudson River north of New York City, where she was using a hydrophone, which is a microphone you drop into the water. And she does this. She loves these kinds of sounds. But what was amazing in the film, and I think what's amazing in general, is there's a whole other sound world happening just below the surface. And you hear bugs and fish and crawfish, eating things. There's just a symphony of sounds. And so in the film, a sequence I really like where she asks our sound person if she can play him the sounds. And so he says, is it okay? And kind of comes into the frame, and she puts the headphones on him, and he's sort of dazzled by the sound, and we hear it as an audience member too. But I like that in general, having the sound people become visible. Because in every other movie, the sound person cannot be in the frame. That's the worst. That's a disaster. It ruins the take. But in this, I really wanted people to be reminded of sound and listening all the time. And so seeing the sound person recording the sound you're hearing in this shot is a way of doing that.
Let's take a look at the trailer.
Are you rolling?
Scene one, take one.
Hello, and welcome to 32 Sounds.
I was sitting at my kitchen table late one night thinking about these tapes. Voicemail messages that I saved over the years. How does a little piece of tape hold a person, make it seem like they're alive? I was wondering why sound has such a strange power.
I love this song.
I'm listening to a whole other world down there. Aquatic insects, bugs, fish. I think of sound as being a channel of connection.
A lot of people ask me, why sound? All I could say is that something was driving me to make this movie, even if I couldn't say exactly what.
Hello, and welcome to 32 Sounds.
That's how you do it. Okay.
There's a sequence in the beginning of the film about Charles Babbage who says sound is just all vibrations. This is from the 1840s or 50s.
Yeah.
All sound is still out there and never dies. And in theory, if we had the right instruments, we could hear every conversation. I mean, that's a concept for something. I don't know whether it's a sci-fi film or... I mean, what do you think about that? Is that just... I mean, it's sort of silly on the one hand.
It's
because
sort of silly. His idea was that since sound is just vibrations, all vibrations theoretically should still be out there, just super, super faint, but somehow on an atomic level, we should still be able to pull this out and hear things. And on some level, it kind of makes sense. And theoretically, it actually is true. I talked to physicists about this, and theoretically, it is true. Practically, it's impossible. And in that way, it's almost like a dream or a poem. You know, it's a poetic notion that time, you know, because the nature of time is that things happen and they're gone. We can never replay the conversation we had yesterday. Yet he was sort of yearning for some world in which we could pull stuff back from the past. So it's an interesting notion.
So you are releasing, at least in the theatrical version, I think there are like 3 or 4 different versions of this. Actually, in my notes, here's the theatrical version, the headphones version. So in some locations, you're giving out headphones for people to hear. And so how are they hearing them through? Are they Wi-Fi or Bluetooth? Or how is
they're FM transmitter headphones, which we really worked hard on how to make a system to have people experience this on headphones. And FM transmitter is the best way, the only way really. Bluetooth wouldn't work. And so we found a British company that makes very high-end FM transmitter headphones. So a lot of the screenings we do is in a movie theater. We give out headphones to everybody. We have 500 sets that we bought. We give them out, and somebody in the back from our team kind of does a live mix of the film score or soundscape.
And then after the theatrical, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your film is going to be on Criterion. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that is the way it's looking. And that, you know, the funny thing is, if you just play the film over like a Vimeo link and wear headphones, it's great. Because a lot of what we're doing is using binaural.
Well, that was the next, that's what this is leading to, the question, because there's a sequence where with the binaural where the something goes around, you know, this head, which I remember seeing somewhere in the past, but in theory, you know, the binaural sound, there's a plastic thing shaped like a head, and I guess microphones inside this object, this sphere, to recreate what we hear. But so the point that I'm getting at is there's a sequence, and I put, you know, I watch this at home, and I have a, you know, good screen and good sound. But when this sequence came up, I grabbed these headphones, and I put these headphones on, and I'm sitting there watching. I think it was the kid and the father running around or whatever. And sure enough, now I'm wondering, is this in my head, or did I actually hear this kid? The sounds go behind me and around, or did I imagine it just because you have a left and because there's really only two channels that you're projecting, right? I mean, that you have on the video, or left and right.
But within the stereo, the thing about binaural recording, which is complicated and sort of magical in a way, is within a stereo signal you can get spatial information. So in that scene, the small kid runs around and runs behind you and the camera. And you really, when you're hearing it, he is back there. And it's just an odd kind of recording that people making movies don't use because it doesn't really work through speakers. And almost all movies have to be screened in an environment with speakers. So this kind of binaural technology is used in gaming and VR a lot, and they're way ahead of film, really, in terms of sound.
Well, the gaming industry grosses a lot more than the film industry does. Most people don't know that.
No.
It's funny, this film also reminded me, and that sequence reminded me of the first time I ever heard stereo. And I can remember it very clearly.
Wow, what was that?
Well, I was a kid. I mean, I hate to age myself how old but this was probably back in the 50s. And I was at some kind of a store and some kind of a tape recorder. I don't even remember the details, except I remember him saying, put these headphones on and listen to this. And there was a train demo in stereo. And I remember being startled and looking around inside a store, you know, and it was, you know, stereo for the first time. I remember going to see 3D, you know, as a kid. I couldn't understand what it was until I actually went and saw it. You have some other really interesting sequences in this film. I mean, I don't want to do the whole index, but I mean, Annea and the piano burning sequence, I guess that was from the 60s.
Yeah.
I mean that, and the artist who sat there silently for 4 minutes and 32 seconds or something like that.
John Cage, yeah.
I guess it goes to prove how important sound is to our perception of what's going on around. Or
but
what.
it's interesting. The thing about sound that interests me so much is that it is profoundly at the heart of how we experience the world, if you're a hearing person. Yet we don't often talk about it. We don't have good language for it. Visual things are well known, and you go into a room and a painting's there. You come back the next day, the painting's still there. There's a kind of stability and knowability to visual phenomenon. But sound is ephemeral and kind of mysterious, and we don't quite know how it works or how to put our finger on it. And it's also unheralded in a way, especially in cinema. So I really felt like there was a lot of fertile ground to work that other people hadn't really mulled over sound and sound in cinema before.
There's one of my favorite sequences in the film is room tone, where filmmakers know that when you're doing a documentary, or even on a big set, they do this. After the action is done and you've recorded, you ask somebody to sit silently for 30 seconds or not move so you can record room tone. And the idea of having room tone is to help you to have just that background bass, so when you're cutting from one thing to another, you can lay that sort of silent track in. And I loved, Philip Glass. I think he ran out of patience there.
Right.
He said, "That's it. He probably gave you 20 seconds."
Yeah.
And I love seeing, I think it was Laurie Anderson, right? Was sitting there. That was such a great sequence.
I've been filming room tone scenes for years, and nobody ever uses them. And they're often very striking because you do a long interview with somebody's sort of on, and then in this moment where you just say to them, you don't have to do anything, they kind of change, and there's often an odd magic to that moment, but you never use it. So this was a great excuse to go through my archive and pull out all these room tones that I've always loved and put them together in a scene.
Well, that's sort of one of the fantasies that I have about this sequence. When you first log in, I usually start the record button right away just so I don't forget. And it's always like, oh, let me adjust this, and how do I do that? And hold on, I've got to get some water or whatever.
You can do your own room tone scene.
If I last long enough, I'm going to do my own room tone. How did the film get? How did you finance the film? And can you give? I always also. At the same time, I'd like to ask what the budget of the film was roughly, and that kind of thing. So, because we have a lot of filmmakers that watch these interviews, and if you can put it in perspective, and then I'll tell you the shocking moment I had on one of the last interviews about that.
I'm all for talking about money, especially with filmmakers, because I feel like it's helpful to know who's spending what, how are people raising money. So I don't, there's a sort of taboo of talking about money, and sometimes it's a little inappropriate. But in this case, the budget is tiny. This budget for this was $800,000, which is really small compared to documentaries today. And we raised it through some equity impact partners and Wavelength, who are great collaborators on this. Then a bunch of people gave us EPs gave us sort of grants to do it. And then I've worked in several different worlds making films. So one of the worlds I'm working in is the performing arts world, because initially this was a live cinema piece and we toured all over to different venues and presented it that way. And in the performing arts world, people commission work. So we got money from Stanford, NYU, Abu Dhabi, Georgia Tech, a bunch of different presenters, performing arts presenters, each put in a bit of money. And that's, in that world, how work gets made. It's this interesting world where the people showing the work feel an obligation to help get it made, which is not true in the film world. In the film world, people want you to show up and give you their finished movie, and then they'll show it. So it's a different world. And I really believe, Chuck, that in this day and age when things are changing so much in the film distribution landscape, one has to be very agile and be in as many different worlds as you can be. So I'm happy to have that.
I missed something in the one sequence, and I'm just going to ask you. I don't know whether I'll include this.
And then you got to tell me the shocking thing.
Oh, well, the shocking one to me, maybe it wasn't shocking to too many other people. I asked Errol Morris the other day on camera, what was the budget of the Pigeon Tunnel?
Yeah.
And he said, well, it was, I didn't really do the money. It was through the estate. And I understand the budget was about $10 million.
Wow.
And I'm fastening my seatbelt, trying not to react. But when you see me, I go like this when he says that, because, and the film, the film is great. It's wonderful. But in reality, it's a sit down interview with one guy and some great B-roll.
What did they spend?
Well, you have to see the film.
$8 million on.
The B-roll is pretty spectacular. The recreations that he did not cheap out on.
Yeah,
You know,
but
it was
still,
like, it was like looking,
that's $1 million at tops, you know?
well, so
I don't know.
tell Errol that, right?
All right.
I wanted to ask you about one sequence. I didn't understand what was the context, other than the fact. Well, maybe I'm going to answer my own question. But there's a sequence with the exile in Cuba. Your friend that you filmed, I think, a number of years ago, and then you went to Cuba in 2006. And the point of that sequence, was it the enjoyment of hearing music on the
Well, I
headphones?
think it was a scene about she's somebody I knew in Cuba. She was an American who was on the run and from the revolutionary person who was sort of hiding out in Cuba. And I met her and we became friends. And I went down many times and filmed her. And she had mentioned a couple songs that she really loved. So one time we just sort of would play around and film things together. So one time I said, hey, Nahanda, I'm going to make a mixtape and I want you to listen to it and I'll film you while you listen to it. And they were songs I knew that were from her past. And, you know, she's somebody who had family in the U.S. She was never able to go back. She never left the island of Cuba for 20 years. So I played her these songs and I filmed her and also then filmed her talking about what she remembered. And so the scene is just about the power of music, especially to transport us to almost like a time machine. It brought her back. The song Ain't No Stopping Us Now brought her back to 1979 and the things she was doing at the moment when that song was big. And I have that too. I'm sure you do too, Chuck, where you hear a certain song and you think, oh God, the song Reunited by Peaches and Herb.
All the time.
Takes me back to junior high, you know.
All the time.
Yeah.
And the strangest part about music especially, I was thinking about it the other day, how, for me, when I hear a piece of music that I know, it takes about 1 second for me to know exactly what the song is.
Yeah.
And I can start singing every lyric in most of these songs. And I listen to music in the shower a lot. And so I'm sort of shocked at how many songs I know and I can, you know, sing along with in the shower and know the words, or at least be kind of up to speed. And I think, gee, I can't remember what I read in the newspaper this morning sometimes, but I know the lyrics to 10,000 songs.
Yeah.
And the sequence that where I took off the headphones, I turned the speakers way up, was the Donna Summer. I Feel Love was so much fun.
It's such a great song. That's
such a great song, and you cannot sit still with this song going on. And I'm going to tell you something else, which I think is a odd compliment, but it's definitely a compliment.
All right.
One of my favorite films of all time is a documentary made in Russia in 1929 called Man with a Movie Camera. Do you know this film?
Of course. Yeah.
Of course, because you're a filmmaker. And I would show this to my students when I was teaching at Cal State Northridge in documentary, and I loved giving them the film and saying, you put a piece of music and come back with a 3-minute piece. And it was always amazingly creative. Your film, in a way, although it's completely different, it reminded me of this film because it's an inside look inside our culture, inside different people, and you get to see, you know, things that are happening, you know, now and a few years back, and it just sort of feels anthropological in a way, even though it's about sound and how we perceive it. It's sort of tied into more than that.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment because I love Man with the Movie Camera, and one of the things I love about Man with the Movie Camera is it's so playful. It takes great joy and pleasure in all this technology and the bustle of cities and the way the cameraman depicts things. It's not a dour movie or not a movie, you know, it's a wonderful, joyful, fun movie, which I hope in
for the most part, not all of it.
For the most part, yeah. But I hope I mean, the world has enough heavy stuff now. I hope. And this is not to say I'm making Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, but I do think lightness and pleasure and joy are important.
I'm looking back at your credits, and now I just realized Weather Underground is one of your films. Was that woman that's in the sound? Was she from the Weather Underground?
No,
Oh.
she's somebody I met.
Oh.
I showed the Weather Underground at the Havana Film Festival, and I met her. But she's a sort of parallel character.
Rainbow Man. I just watched The Rainbow Man today in preparation for this. And, of course, I'm of an age where I remember seeing The Rainbow Man on every live sporting event and much, much more. I did not know or didn't remember the postscript to The Rainbow Man and what happened to him, which was pretty bizarre.
It's pretty bizarre. And you want to know something really terrible? He's still in prison.
Well, at the end of your film, which I guess was made in the late 90s,
1997,
says he'll be eligible. He got 2 life sentences, but he'll be eligible for parole in 2002. And I thought, oh my goodness, well, he must be out and about and doing that. I was going to ask you, where is he?
He's still in prison. I mean, it's terrible because what the Rainbow Man, you sort of mentioned, this kooky guy who'd show up at sporting events wearing a rainbow wig. He got famous. Then he became a born-again Christian, started holding up signs that would say John 3:16, and got increasingly sort of like paranoid and obsessed with the apocalypse and sort of the end times version of Christianity. He ended up taking 2 people hostage, demanding a worldwide press conference. It didn't work, and he went to prison. And he got 2 life sentences. He was up for parole, but to get parole, you have to say, I was wrong, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. And he's still, committed to the idea that the end of the world is coming. He's got to alert people. So he's just never going to get out. And that was 30 years ago. He's been in prison 30 years.
What are you working on next?
Oh, I'm working, still doing a ton of screenings of 32 Sounds, which is great. I mean, you make something to put it out in the world, and when the world wants to see your work, it's a great honor and privilege. So I'm doing a lot of that, but I'm also starting a new documentary about trees, which I'm really excited about, and I'm trying to figure out how the hell can you make something about such a vast and wonderful topic. So
Trees.
I love this because I'm making a movie also at the same time about the oldest person in the world. And if you tell people you're making a movie about the oldest person in the world, they always say, wow, how old? It's like, people are interested. And then when I say I'm making a movie about trees, people are like,
Well, what comes to my mind when you say I'm making a movie about trees is I remember hearing somewhere in some other documentary about how they communicate with one another in the forest, and
that's great.
I'm sure there's much more to it, and I can't wait to see it because I think your films are very interestingly unique and different and somewhat spiritual. And there's also the sequence where you do the Lebanese scientist that finds the tape to himself that he taped when he was 11, and here he is now, I don't know, in his late 40s or maybe 50,
probably 60, I think.
Is he? And he hears the tape of the 11-year-old himself saying, I hope you become an astronaut or at least an engineer, and I hope you do it for the good. And
I hope you make my dreams come true.
I know, it was weird, wasn't it?
The 11-year-old was so bossy towards the grown-up version of himself.
When you were recording this, the sound guys that you hired to do the sound in the field, were they just like the regular sound guys that you would hire, or were they special guys? And then how did you hook up with the sound designer, Mark? Sound designer.
It's funny because I had to find sound recordists who had experience with VR and gaming, because a lot of straight documentary sound recordists don't know about binaural and ambisonic mics and how to use them. So I found a great woman who's in the film several times. At some point she's pregnant, holding up mics and driving around the In the Air Tonight guy. She drives around in this guy's car and holds the mic out the window. So that was a challenge, but fun. I learned a lot through the sound people we worked with. But Mark Mangini was the best thing that ever happened to me. He's very illustrious Hollywood sound designer. He did Dune. He did Mad Max Fury Road. He's been doing sound design for 40 years. And somebody put me in touch with him very early in the process. And I had a great conversation with him about sound because he loves sound. He's been thinking about sound for 40 years. He's very smart. And so I said, Mark, could I just every week ask you some questions? And he said, sure, because he likes to talk about sound. So we struck up this relationship, and I just asked him questions and learned a ton from him. And even when I would do shoots, I would ask him, how should I put the dummy head binaural mic? Should I put something on the stand? It's just, he was an integral part. And then after about a year, I said, Mark, would you do the sound design? Just knowing that he was I had my hooks in him already. And he said, sure. And one thing I love is that he did Dune, won an Oscar, did 32 Sounds, and then did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles after that. And so he's like, just the trajectory of that makes me happy. But he was a great collaborator. Normally, sound design is thought of as a part of post-production, which I think is kind of crazy because he was literally a collaborator from the beginning and shaped what we shot and how we shot it, how we recorded it. And it would not be the movie it is without him. So it's something I'm really happy about, and I admire him like crazy.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest.
John.
And I hope everybody gets to see your film and wearing headphones when they watch it.
The truth is, we did a version that's in theaters that's 7.1 surround sound, and that's actually great too, because the things you mentioned, like the kid running around, in surround sound you can do that. And so my fear is if people watch it with their laptop speakers, that's sort of the worst version of this, because you're just getting a little left and right. So
I was sitting at my kitchen table late one night thinking about these tapes. Voicemail messages that I saved over the years. How does a little piece of tape hold a person? Make it seem like they're alive?